In the previous video, I mentioned that you can create an area type when you click and drag with the type tool instead of just simply clicking on the artboard. So what does that actually mean? If I click and drag, it will create a multi-line text frame in which the text is automatically added, which again is just this dummy text, only helping you to imagine how the actual copy will look like once you place that into this text frame. But the most important thing about this feature is that it automatically breaks up the lines, and by default it uses hyphenation as well. Now, the reason my text looks so messed up is because we were using all these options in the previous video, and it just carried on the same formatting to this new text frame. Illustrator always remembers your last used formatting. How can we quickly reset that? That's also an important one to learn. So first of all, I would use Command or Control A to select all the text within this frame. And then I would go to the Character Panel menu and choose Reset Panel. So when you use Reset Panel, it will reset it back to the default Myriad Pro font and 12-point size, and all the rest of the options here will reset itself. So that's much more manageable what I have now. And if I want to quickly fill the rest of this frame or area type with this lorem ipsum random copy, I can right click and just simply choose Fill with Placeholder Text, which will generate the remaining part of the frame and fill it up once again with this random copy. So what happens if I use the selection tool and I move this frame around? Now we can see that it's slightly different from the line type that we've seen in the previous example. Here we have these controllers around the edges with which we will be able to do different changes. But first of all, let's try to use one of these points, maybe this one here. If I drag it further in, you can see that the lines are automatically adjusting to the new width within this text frame. Again, something that you would only get with an area type. The good thing is that if you wanted to work with an area type but you accidentally started a line type, you can convert one to the other. So like this one up here is a line type, and how do I know it? Well, if I start dragging the side point, that one is just stretching the text instead of giving more space to work with the text. So I can tell that this is a point type or line type. And to turn it into an area type, I can go up to the type menu and simply choose Convert to Area Type. And once I do that, now you will see that it doesn't stretch the text, it just simply adds more space or reduces the space in which the text can be visible. Also notice that if I make my frame smaller than the amount of text that I have inside it, it would result in some of the characters or words being hidden. That's what we call overflow, and it's actually marked with this little red plus here. Notice that we also have the same here at the bottom of this text frame, meaning that there's also some text that's currently not visible in there. You can, first of all, increase the size of your area type or text frame until you see all the text, and you can tell that there is no red plus anymore here at the bottom. So there's nothing missing from here. So the same thing I can do here as well, either increasing the horizontal or vertical size of your area type. But there is also another interesting technique called threading text. And this is actually something you would do very often in InDesign. But the good thing is that you can actually do it here in Illustrator, and it almost works exactly the same. So all you have to do, if you have overflow, is to click on that red plus sign, which loads the outstanding text into your cursor. And then all you have to do is to click and drag to define the next area type. And then these two frames will be connected to each other. So as you can see, if I amend the first frame size, the text can flow back and forth between these two frames. So that can be very handy, very useful feature. And with this thread between the two frames, you can always tell where the text is actually starting and where it is going. Now, if I accidentally delete this second frame, the text is not going to be missing. It is actually just loaded back into the first frame. Now, similarly to the character panel, when you work with more text, you might want to use the paragraph panel, which you can access from the drop down as well. So this is the paragraph panel from the options bar, but you can find it also from window type paragraph. So selecting that will open up this panel. And again, from the panel menu, you can make sure that you see all the options for it. And now let's go through these as well, similarly to what we did in the previous video. So the first line is all about the alignment of text. So I can change it to center align instead of flush left or align left. We also have align right. And then we have all kinds of justification options. So we can justify with the last line align left, center, or right. And we can also fully justify. That means even those short lines at the end of each paragraph will be also justified, which is rarely something I would use because that can result in very ugly formatting of text. So I would normally use the justify with last line align left if I want to do justification. But be careful with justification, because if your lines are too narrow, let's just say something like this, justify text can easily lead to something that we call rivers in text, which means you would have these long gaps that runs through the lines in the text, and that's not really pleasant. Again, it's something you want to avoid. The worst thing probably you can do is not to use hyphenation and use justification at the same time. So hyphenation is again another option you can find here in the paragraph panel, and you can just simply turn it off. So when that is off and you have a justified text and very narrow width for the text frame, that's when you will see most of these rivers showing up and big gaps in some of the lines. The reason why hyphenation can improve it slightly is because it helps to break up words, long words, and then it just allows Illustrator to move the words in a little bit more even amount between each line, so it balances them out slightly. But once again, avoid using justification if you have very narrow spaces that you need to work with text. So I would recommend most of the time to use align left. But if you use align left, then you should avoid using hyphenation. So it's a bit contradicting, but in this way of formatting text, it actually works better if you don't use hyphenation. And of course, there are so many other rules in typography and typesetting that we could talk about, but these are the main things that you should keep in mind when you work with text. But there's a couple of additional features here in this panel worth looking at. First of all, there is the indent option, the left indent. Now, if I increase that, I can hold down Shift key to increase it faster so we can see it moving. That simply just pushes the text in from the left. Now, because I have the whole frame selected, it moves the whole text all together. But if I double click within the text frame and my cursor is flashing somewhere within the text, then if I use the indent option, in this case it will only indent the currently selected paragraph. And notice that you don't have to have the paragraph selected. It's enough to have the cursor flashing within that paragraph. So left indent, for example, could be useful if you want to separate a certain paragraph from the rest. Let's say this is something like a quote, which can be indicated with something like italic formatting as well. So going back to my character panel, I can change the style to italic. Again, that depends whether the current font that you're working with allows to use italic formatting or not. And similarly to like bold or condensed, you would find all these different options here if the font has these features. So that looks very different from the rest of the text now. But another useful thing you can do if you want to separate a paragraph from the rest is to use spacing before and after the paragraph. So instead of pressing enter and create an empty line, what I would recommend to do is to keep that paragraph selected that you want to separate, and use the space before paragraph option, maybe 10 points. Again, holding down shift when I use the arrows, and then space after paragraph would do the same, just after the currently selected paragraph. Now there's also another useful version of indent, and that is when you indent only the first line of a paragraph. So let me try this on this next paragraph here. If I increase that value, you can see that in this case, I'm not indenting the whole paragraph, just the first line. And by the way, you can also indent the whole paragraph from the right, which would make it more narrow, not from the left in this case, but from the right. So imagine there would be a margin here from the right, at the moment 40 points distance from the right edge of this text frame. So in a nutshell, the paragraph panel will allow you to make changes on a little bit larger scale on text, so not on small units like a character or a word, but a larger amount of text, so on a paragraph level. It can change the alignment, it can add justification, it can enable or disable hyphenation, it can add indents and spacing before and after paragraphs. We are not going to go deeper than this, but if you want to make more amends, you can even go deeper into justification and hyphenation rules by going into the panel menu and then choosing those options. You have plenty of ways of refining how they work. So that was justification, and that's also hyphenation, which you can again customize if you want. But what I would like to talk about in the next video is how to save a certain type of formatting and reuse it in either the current project you are working on or even in other projects. So we will be talking about using text styles in the next video.